In the summer of 1856, in the sweltering heart of Mississippi, a 9-year-old enslaved girl named Sarah Sutton was buried alive on Blackwood Plantation. 3 days later, she clawed her way out of the earth that was meant to keep her forever. What followed turned Blackwood into a place whispered about in the dark, a name the South tried to erase, and a wound that never fully healed. This is the forgotten story that lived only in terrified memories until now. The world she rose into was a furnace. Heat clung to the land like a curse, drowning every breath in the smell of dust and cotton. 300 acres stretched in every direction, rows of white fields shimmering beneath a sky too bright to trust. This land had made the Sutton family rich, but its wealth came from the bodies it owned. Bodies that bent, bled, and broke, with no claim even to themselves. Those lands belonged to Margaret Sutton, widow, landowner, and the kind of woman whose silence felt more dangerous than a man's anger. Nearly 50, tall and severe, she carried ledgers the way priests carried scripture. Every seed bought, every bale harvested, every enslaved life catalogued and priced. People were numbers. Numbers were property. Property was profit. That was the breath and blood of Blackwood. Before this story goes any deeper into Sarah's nightmare, take a moment to breathe and stay with me. Drop a comment with the city you're listening from, and subscribe to Forgotten Liturgy so these buried histories never disappear again. Now, back to Blackwood. In the economy of the 1850s South, a healthy man stood at $1,200. A strong woman, just shy of 1,000. Children, lower, much lower. Sarah appeared in Margaret's ledger at $250, and even that, Margaret believed, was generous. Most plantation owners would have labeled a small, sickly child like her at half that price, or sent her to the sugar fields in Louisiana, where life expectancy for children was shorter than the time it took sugarcane to grow. Sarah's last name, Sutton, wasn't heritage. It was ownership. She was born here in 1847, as her mother Ruth died delivering her. Ruth had once been valued at $900. Sarah arrived replacing that value with a much smaller number. From the moment she drew breath, Margaret's ledger marked her existence as loss. She never grew the way a child should. At 9, she was tiny, barely 4 feet tall, fragile-limbed, always on the edge of exhaustion. Her voice lived just above a whisper, her eyes too large and too knowing for someone so young. She didn't play, didn't laugh, didn't sing the night songs drifting through the quarters. She worked quietly, obediently, moving like someone trying to disappear. Margaret called her the weak one. The overseer Coleman Briggs used words much harsher. Briggs was brutality on 2 legs. Thick-necked, heavy-handed, with a whip he wore like a snake coiled at his hip. He was paid well $60 a month, a king's wage for an overseer. Every cent was earned through fear. Under his watch, cotton output soared by 40%. Death rose with it. 23 enslaved people buried in 6 years, 7 of them children. The price of efficiency, but Sarah confounded him. There was nothing to break. No rebellion, no spark. Just silence, trembling and small. And so he pushed her harder. More weight. Longer hours. Crueler tasks. If she survived, she'd toughen. If she didn't, well, she was a bad investment anyway. The quarters knew what he was doing, and they knew they couldn't stop it. Esther, one of the oldest women on the plantation, tried. Purchased 40 years earlier. She had birthed 11 children it sold. 3 buried. Her body was worth little now, but her heart still carried room for one more child to protect. She slipped Sarah bits of food when possible, shielded her when she could, held her through the night when nightmares tore her awake. Esther told the others Sarah wouldn't live to see 15. Some children weren't built for this world, she said. Some were too gentle for a world made of chains. Among the enslaved was Daniel, 20 years old, tall, strong, worth every cent of his $1,200 price. He watched Sarah from afar, aware of her struggle, aware that something fragile and strange clung to her like a shadow. None of them, Esther, Daniel, not even Briggs could have guessed the horror that awaited her, or that the child they pitied was about to become the most feared name in Mississippi. Daniel had been born on the plantation, shaped from childhood into exactly the kind of labor Margaret valued. Strong, fast, obedient, able to pick 200 pounds of cotton a day when the season demanded it. He could fix tools, mend gears, and even read enough numbers to keep basic tallies, which made him too useful to lose and too watched to ever step out of line. He often worked near Sara, and every time he saw her struggling with the weight of her sack, something in him moved before his mind could stop it. He tried to help her switch rows, carry the burden she shouldn't have been carrying at all, but Briggs watched everything. Any act of kindness, any sign of unity, was treated as rebellion. Briggs crushed cooperation because a community could start imagining itself as human, and that was the one thing he feared more than anything. But Daniel kept trying. Sarah's quiet suffering stirred a kind of forbidden anger in him, the kind that made enslaved men disappear. His mother had spent years telling him to keep his head down, to be grateful he was strong enough to survive, to never feel anything too deeply. But watching a child work herself toward death, while the people who owned her cared only for her output, lit a fire inside him. He couldn't see. Harvest season, from August to October, was the heartbeat of Blackwood Plantation. The months that determined the year's profits. Cotton sold high, and a strong worker brought in more in 90 days than their yearly upkeep cost. Every body was a calculation. Every hour boiled down $2. And Sara, teeny exhausted, barely able to gather 30 or 40 pounds on her best days, was a loss on paper. In the cold arithmetic of the plantation, she wasn't worth the food she ate. And so Margaret simply reduced it. Less cotton meant less food, which meant less strength, which meant even less cotton. It was a spiral designed not to correct weakness, but to erase it. Briggs added his own cruelty. When she failed her quota, he made her work through meals, assigned her the hardest rows, mocked her, struck her. He told her she should be grateful she hadn't been sent south, to the sugar fields, where children didn't last a year. Sara absorbed every word the way she absorbed the heat, quietly, helplessly, with no space left in her small body to fight back. August 15th, 1856 began like every day before it. The bell rang before sunrise, dragging people from their cabins' tiny dark rooms packed with bodies and barely enough air to breathe. Sara had coughed all night, the cotton dust clawing at her lungs until small flecks of blood speckled the straw beneath her. Esther had warned her that the dust killed slowly, that once it settled in your lungs, it never left. Sara was already fading, and everyone around her knew it. They moved to the fields in silence, shadows crossing the gray morning, saving the little strength they had for the heat to come. By noon, Sara had picked barely 15 pounds. Her fingers were shredded by the sharp cotton bolls, her back bent in a permanent ache, her breath shallow and burning. The sun was merciless, turning the fields into a shimmering furnace. She had been given 1 cup of water at dawn and would not see another until sunset. Water breaks, Margaret believed, cut productivity by 8%, so thirst was simply part of the labor, and collapse was simply the cost of business. Still, Sara kept picking, dragging her small body down the endless rows, fighting the pain she was too tired to cry about. And somewhere behind her, Daniel watched, helpless, furious, and afraid of the part of himself that wanted to save Herbie, 'cause he knew that on this land, compassion was a crime that could get them both killed. The cost of losing a little work was nothing compared to the cost of letting people rest. That was how the plantation saw it, and that was why Sara's mouth felt like sand, why her tongue clung to her teeth as if even it no longer had strength. The heat twisted her vision, making the earth shift beneath her feet. Every few moments she had to pause, squeeze her eyes shut, steady her breathing. What she really wanted was to lie down, to surrender to the dark edge tugging at her. But lying down meant punishment, and punishment meant less food. Less food meant dying faster. So she forced her small hands to keep moving. When Briggs rode out around midday, the workers tensed. He carried a scale, a whip, and a loaded pistol, symbols of authority he wielded with pride. He had killed 2 people who had tried to run, and both deaths were declared justified. The law made it easy. If an enslaved person tried to escape, they were stealing themselves, and theft could be stopped by any means. He stopped at Sara's row, grabbed her half-empty sack, and weighed it in his fist. His voice carried across the field as he shouted, making sure every set of ears heard the humiliation. 15 pounds in 8 hours. His anger wasn't just about the number, it was about the spectacle. He wanted fear to spread. Sara whispered that she was trying, but her voice was barely a thread of sound. That only enraged him more. He hated when the weak stayed quiet. He wanted resistance, so punishment felt earned. Instead, she just swayed before him like a dying plant. He shook her, barking that she cost 20 cents a day to feed, that she produced nothing, that she was stealing from people who actually worked. The math he spat was technically correct, but deliberately cruel. It ignored the truth that she was 9, underfed, sick, and forced into labor she never chose. None of that mattered to him. Profit. Briggs dragged her out where everyone could see. Punishment was always public suffering. Was a lesson. He drew his whip, long and braided, capable of tearing skin open in a single lash. Esther took a few steps toward them, instinct pulling her, but Daniel caught her arm. Helping would only get them whipped too, or worse. Everyone knew it. They had learned it again and again. Briggs raised the whip high, sunlight catching the leather. Sarah didn't run, didn't cry. She simply waited, accepting what she had no power to escape. She had been whipped many times before. She knew the burning, the tearing, the long nights lying on her stomach while wounds festered. But before the strike fell, she collapsed. Her body dropped as if it had simply stopped being strong enough to stay upright. No hands reached out to break her fall. She hit the dirt like a lifeless doll. Her eyes rolled back, showing only white, her breath shallow, her skin turning the color of ash. Briggs kicked her, ordering her to get up, promising worse if she didn't. But she didn't move. Her chest barely rose. Her lips were blue. She looked like someone fading between breaths. Daniel broke before fear could hold him back. He ran to her side, knowing he'd pay for it. He felt for her. Heartbeat weak, irregular, like it was stuttering. He told Briggs she needed a doctor, that she was dying, but Briggs knocked him aside. Daniel still stayed by her, shielding her small body. He begged for mercy not for himself, but for her. Briggs cursed. If she died in the field, there would be questions. Margaret did not like losing property, not even property worth only a couple $100. Better to let the doctor handle it, so blame could fall elsewhere. He ordered 2 workers to carry her to the house and pointed at Daniel, promising punishment later. They lifted Sara like she weighed nothing at all. Daniel watched her go, a terrible certainty taking root that this might be the last time he saw her alive. The plantation doctor, Thomas Marie, was an old man who'd charged Margaret a yearly fee that made him cheaper than a single cow. His treatments were crude, bleeding people, dosing them with opium when needed, and letting nature do the rest. Experience mattered little here. Skilled doctors rarely treated enslaved people. Many thought of it as animal work. Sara was placed on the floor of his small examination room. The bed was for white patients. The floor was for everyone else. Merritt examined her casually, as if checking on a tool rather than a child. Her pulse fluttered weakly beneath his fingers, stopping and starting like a broken clock. He pressed his ear to her chest and heard fluid rattling deep inside her lungs. Her eyes rolled back when he lifted her lids, revealing mostly white, a sign that her consciousness was slipping away fast. He straightened up slowly, not yet saying the words out loud, but the truth hung between them all the same. Sara was closer to dying than anyone wanted to admit. Dr. Merritt pressed his hand against Sara's forehead and felt heat radiating from her skin like a furnace, her hands and feet. However, were ice-cold blood pulling back from her limbs as her body tried desperately to keep her organs alive. It was the final stage of collapse, something he had seen many times and rarely reversed. Margaret watched from the doorway, arms folded, irritation etched on her face rather than worry. To her, this was a delay, an inconvenience. She wanted a diagnosis, the same way she wanted an update on a broken plow. Merritt stood and told her plainly that the child's lungs were filling with fluid. The dehydration and heat had pushed her into system-wide failure. Margaret didn't flinch. Deaths like this were routine. When she asked if he could save Sara, she asked it the same way she might ask whether a damaged tool could be repaired. The doctor shrugged. He listed the costs, the medicines, the manpower it would take, and the low chance of survival. In his own blunt assessment, nature might simply be removing the weak. And Margaret immediately did the math. $10 to maybe save a child who had never produced enough to justify her upkeep. $10 she would almost certainly lose. She gave the only answer she felt made business sense. Don't waste the medicine. Make her comfortable. If she dies, she dies. God's will. It was the phrase slaveholders used to wash their hands clean of responsibility. Merritt gave Sara the smallest dose of laudanum he could justify, just enough to dull the edges of her pain, and then left her on the floor while he went to enjoy his dinner. By early evening, her condition had spiraled. The fever climbed higher, her skin burning while her breaths grew slower, weaker, pausing for long stretches, as if her lungs had forgotten their purpose. She never woke, she never moved. Only the faint twitch of her fingers hinted that her body was still fighting, even as the fight slipped out of reach. Around 7, Merritt returned, took one look at her, and declared she would be gone before morning, likely within hours. It told Betty, a house servant who had watched too many people die in that room, to sit with the girl until the end and notify him afterward. At 8:35 p.m., Sarah Sutton's chest went still. Betty waited, watching the silence stretch until she was certain it wasn't Ted coming back. Merritt arrived, annoyed, checked for breath and heartbeat, and wrote another line in his ledger. Sarah Sutton, age 9. Pneumonia, chronic weakness, entry number 437. Another death, nothing more. Margaret received the news over roasted chicken, barely pausing between bites. She ordered the body buried behind the barn, a place reserved for dead animals and discarded tools. Not the cemetery, not the marked graves, just the dirt behind the outbuildings, where forgotten things belonged. Briggs sent James and Moses with shovels. No coffin wood cost money. They wrapped Sarah's small body in a torn piece of canvas once used for cotton bales and carried her out into the night. The earth was soft from other burials, and the grave took little time. 4 feet deep, 6 feet long, just enough space for a child. They lowered her in with no prayer, no song, nothing. Briggs forbade any ceremony. He didn't want emotion. He didn't want meaning. He wanted efficiency. By the time the grave was filled and the dirt tamped flat, the night was quiet again. No marker, no sign she had ever lived. Just another shadow swallowed by Mississippi soil. From the slave quarters, Esther watched through tears, her hands covering her mouth to keep from crying out. She had wanted to prepare Sarah's body, to honor her, to give her even a moment of dignity. None of them were allowed. Daniel stood beside her, fists clenched, jaw tight, anger burning inside him like something that might one day break loose. She deserved better, he whispered, barely audible, and he knew, in the deepest part of himself, that something inside him had changed forever. Daniel whispered that she deserved so much better, and Esther nodded, wiping her eyes as she stared at the sinking mound of earth. Everyone buried in that cursed ground had deserved more. 9 years of life, and Sarah never had a single day that belonged to her. They stayed there until the darkness fully settled in, whispering prayers they weren't allowed to say aloud, mourning a child the world had already forgotten. But the bell would ring at 5 in the morning, and grief had no place in the rhythm of Blackwood. Cotton still grew, quotas still waited, and the sun would rise without mercy. By dawn of August 16th, everything looked the same. People marched to the fields. Overseers shouted, cotton sacks dragged across dry soil, and in Margaret's ledger, Sarah became a line of ink. Sarah Sutton, age 9, died August 10th, 1856. Loss of asset value, $250. She would file the death like a broken cartwheel. Using it to reduce her taxes, behind the barn, the grave began to sink, the earth collapsing into the hollow space beneath. August 17th passed with the same numb repetition. Heat, labor, exhaustion, silence. No one spoke Sarah's name. Speaking of the dead invited misfortune, and besides, what was there to say? Another child gone. It happened often enough that sorrow became a luxury no one could afford. You moved on, or you broke. But August 18th shattered the routine. The night was suffocating, the air thick with humidity, promising rain that never came. Most of Blackwood slept by 9, sprawled in exhaustion inside cabins that held the day's heat like ovens. Those still awake heard it first, a scraping sound from the direction of the barn, soft at fierce like claws or hands dragging through dirt. Then louder, more deliberate, more determined, a sound of something trying to get out. The dogs reacted instantly, all 6 of them exploding into terrified barking. Not the angry bark of protection, but something primal, panicked, like every instinct screamed at them to flee. Their hackles rose. One dog even urinated in fear. James, who had night duties, grabbed a lantern and stepped toward the barn, shouting at the dogs to quiet down. They refused. They backed away, barking at whatever waited behind the barn, refusing to go anywhere near it. The air felt wrong, colder, heavy with something unnatural. James moved cautiously around the barn, lantern casting shaky light across freshly dug earth. He saw the graves, 3 small mounds. 2 peaceful, 1 disturbed. Sarah's. The dirt was split open from below, pushed upward as if something had clawed its way out. As James took another step, his breath caught. A small hand, pale and filthy, was reaching through the soil, fingers curling, grabbing at open air. Beneath it, a dirt-covered face rose slowly, gasping like someone surfacing from deep water. He dropped the lantern and screamed louder than he ever had in his life. The scream ripped through the night, sending people pouring out of cabins with torches and shaking hands. Coleman Briggs stormed in, half-dressed, rifle raised, ready to punish whoever caused the noise, until he saw what everyone was staring at. Sarah was climbing out of her grave. She pulled herself upward with steady, deliberate movements, dirt tumbling off her like ash. The burial canvas clung to her thin frame. Her hair was matted with earth, her dress torn and rotting from days underground. But her eyes were alive. 2. Alive, bright in the torchlight, focused and aware in a way they never had been in life. She stood at the edge of the grave, so small, so fragile, but impossibly steady for someone who had been dead 3 days. Silence swallowed the crowd. The dogs kept howling from afar, refusing to come any closer. Everyone stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. They knew she had died. They had watched her being buried, had seen the canvas wrapped around her lifeless body, had heard Dr. Merritt confirm her death. No heartbeat, no breath, no chance. Yet here she stood, breathing, watching them. Esther broke first, running forward with tears streaming, falling to her knees before the dirt-covered child. Her hands trembled as she reached out, terrified that touching the girl would make her vanish like smoke. Child Sarah, is that really you? Sarah looked down at her, nodding slowly. When she spoke, her voice was ragged, damaged from thirst and burial, but it carried a strength it had never possessed. Yes, Esther, it's me. I'm alive. She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd, heavy with a meaning no one understood. I came back. Not I survived. Not I woke up. I came back, and in the still, burning night, those words felt like a warning. I came back. She said it the way someone might describe returning from a place they'd visited, calm, sure, deliberate. Not as a survivor, but as someone who made a decision, and everyone there felt the difference. Dr. Merritt was dragged from his bed, muttering angrily until he heard the words that stopped his heart. Sarah Sutton is alive. He arrived at the grave trembling, staring at the dirt-covered girl standing in the torchlight. His face drained of color. He had checked her pulse, her lungs, her eyes. He had declared her dead in front of witnesses. Yet she was breathing now, her chest rising steady and strong. His medical instincts took over. He grabbed her wrist pulse strong. He pressed his ear to her. Chest heart perfect. He examined her pupils normal, reactive. Her lungs were clear, her skin warm. Every symptom of her sickness had vanished. 3 days underground, yet she showed no signs of oxygen loss or damage. Not even dehydration. Nothing made sense. You are dead, he whispered, shaking. By every measure we have, you were gone. Sarah held his gaze with eyes too aware, to calm for a child. I was dead, doctor. My heart stopped at 8:35 on the 5/10. I didn't breathe. My brain went dark. You weren't wrong. Her voice was hoarse, but confident. But death isn't always final. Sometimes it lets you go back. Margaret arrived, then, wrapped in a robe, furious from being awakened until she saw the impossible sight. Her anger melted into shocked silence. She stared at Sara, like she was looking at a ledger filled with numbers that refused to add up. Death was supposed to be absolute, clean, permanent. This was chaos to Margaret's orderly world. "Explain this," she demanded, voice trembling despite her effort to hide it. "Dr. Merritt, explain it now." The doctor stumbled for an answer, clinging to the only theory he could form. "Catalepsy, perhaps." She entered a state so deep it mimicked death rare. But his own voice faltered. Catalepsy couldn't keep someone alive underground for 3 days. Dirt blocked all air. Canvas trapped every breath. It was impossible, and the crowd knew it. Briggs stepped forward, gripping his rifle, angry because fear made him stupid. Maybe she wasn't dead all the way. Maybe she woke up and clawed out. But even he knew the grave was too deep, the soil too heavy. A grown man couldn't escape. A frail child could never. Sarah's eyes met his, and shockingly, Briggs stepped back. Something in her gaze hollowed him out, made him feel small. "I didn't dig out, Mr. Briggs," she said softly. "The earth released me. Death, send me back." The words drifted through the crowd like cold wind. I was in darkness a long time. No breath, no movement, no pain. Just nothing. And then something spoke. The people leaned in, terrified, mesmerized. It said I could stay in the dark, or I could return. But if I came back, I had to finish something. I had to make things right. I had to show them. Her eyes lifted to Margaret steady, unafraid, glowing faintly in the firelight. "Show them what they've done. Show them what we're worth. Show them you can't throw people away like trash and expect no consequences." Whispers spread instantly. Some made old protective signs, tracing symbols from ancestors long dead. Some prayed, but many stared at Sara with something new, something dangerous. Hope. Because they all understood, even if they couldn't name it. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't medicine. This wasn't life returning by chance. This was something else, something that had chosen to come back. Sarah standing there was an offense to the natural order itself. She should not have been alive, yet there she was covered in grave dirt, breathing, aware, and impossibly calm. Margaret tried to reclaim authority, insisting this was only a medical confusion, that Sarah had been in a coma, that Dr. Merritt misdiagnosed her, that she somehow dug herself out. But her trembling hands betrayed her. Her commands, normally obeyed, instantly fell dead in the air. No one moved. No one believed her. For the first time in her life, Margaret Sutton felt powerless before the very people she ruled. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady and merciless. "You're lying, Mrs. Sutton. You know I was dead. Everyone here knows. I was cold. I was stiff. 3 days. 3 days." She revealed the truth. Margaret hoped no one would say aloud that she had judged Sarah's life too cheap to save, that she calculated her value on a ledger and decided the medicine wasn't worth the cost. The crowd listened in absolute silence. Then Sarah spoke words no child should have the weight to speak. "I know what I'm worth now. More than this plantation. Because I came back. I crossed a place none of you understand. I returned to show what you really are." Her voice ignited something in the enslaved people. Hope. Dangerous hope. The kind that could shatter a world. Briggs tried to stop it the only way he knew, by raising his rifle. But when Sarah looked at him, her eyes darkened into void-like pits that swallowed the starlight. When if he did, every bullet swerved off target as if the air itself bent to protect her. Shot after shot missed. His confidence dissolved into terror. He dropped the rifle and fled like a frightened child. Sarah didn't chase him. She simply told the enslaved people she wasn't here to hurt them, that she wasn't a demon, she was still Sarah, but changed, given purpose by whatever she had seen in death. Then she pointed at Margaret. "I'm here for the ones who hurt us. It starts with the people who make the calculations." Margaret Shagan, trembling, sputtered orders for someone to seize Sarah, but no one moved. Not one person stepped forward. The balance of power had shifted forever. No one dared touch Sarah. Even the white staff, normally conditioned to obey Margaret without hesitation, stood motionless, refusing to come near the girl who had clawed her way out of a grave. Sarah's eyes swept over them, pausing on Esther, on Daniel, on those who had mourned her. "I came back to make things right," she said, her voice calm and terrifying in its certainty. "Justice is coming to Blackwood Plantation, justice. That doesn't he care about your laws or your ledgers?" She walked toward the slave quarters. the crowd parting like water around her. People reached out, then pulled back, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or something older, darker. Sara entered the cabin she shared with Esther, laid down on her mat, and fell asleep with a peace she had never known in life. Esther sat beside her, touching her face gently warm, alive, human. Yet when she pulled her hand back, grave dirt clung to her fingertips. In that moment, she knew Sara had truly died, and the dead did not return without purpose. Across the quarters, no one slept. They whispered, prayed, trembled, trying to fit the night's horror into their understanding of the world. Some felt hope for the first time dangerous, trembling hope that maybe the universe had not forgotten them. Margaret stood outside the big house, staring at the quarters with dread. She tried to force rational explanations: catalepsy, premature burial, anything but her instincts knew better. Something unnatural had stepped back into her world, and whatever followed would be outside her control. Dr. Merritt sat at his desk, staring at the death certificate he signed with total certainty only days before. Now, it mocked him. Sarah Sutton, age 9, was alive. His faith in medicine, and death itself, cracked under the weight of what he had seen. He drank to quiet the trembling in his hands, to silence the memory of Sarah's voice saying, "I was dead." Briggs barricaded himself inside his room, guns loaded, lamps blazing. The bravest man on the plantation was now terrified of shadows. He told himself Sara was just a child, but he remembered her eyes, the darkness inside them, the voice that seemed to speak from somewhere far beyond human. He knew she remembered every cruelty he'd ever inflicted, and that she had come back to settle accounts. By dawn on August 19th, Blackwood Plantation felt changed, as if the land itself held its breath. A gray, heavy sky pressed down on everything. People hesitated to leave their cabins when the work bell rang. Their eyes kept drifting toward Esther's cabin, toward the small girl sleeping inside. Some crept close, peering through the walls. Sara looked normal in the dim morning light, just a child who needed washing, small and quiet and still. But they felt it instantly. The cold wrongness beneath her peaceful breathing. The sense that whatever lay in that sleeping body was no longer simply Sarah Sutton. Something had come back, and the plantation would never be the same again. Something in the world had shifted. Margaret Sutton hadn't slept a single minute. She sat rigidly at her desk in her nightclothes, the ledgers open before her yet completely unseen. All night, her mind replayed the impossible image: Sara, pulling herself out of the earth after 3 full days of cold, breathless. Death. Margaret had spent her entire life trusting numbers, order, rules that never changed. But if death could be undone, if one of nature's absolute laws could simply break, then every certainty she clung to began to crack. What else might be false? What other rules could shatter without warning? At 6 in the morning, she summoned Dr. Merritt and Coleman Briggs. Merritt arrived shaking, older somehow, the night having drained the certainty from him. Briggs came late, armed to the teeth, jumpy and wide-eyed, as if something unseen lurked in every corner. Neither man carried the confidence they'd always relied on. Margaret forced herself into the role of authority. "We need control before this turns into panic or rebellion." Her voice tried to project calm, but a tremor revealed her fear. The official story is simple. Sara was in a cataleptic state. Dr. Merritt misdiagnosed her. She revived, dug herself out, and that is all. Merritt seized the explanation like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Yes, catalepsy. Documented cases, he rambled, lying to himself because the truth, true death undone, was unbearable. Briggs leaned forward, unable to contain his fear. What about her threats? What she said about justice? She should be punished. Sold south before she spreads this madness. The suggestion tempted Margaret for a moment, but she saw the larger danger instantly. Selling Sara would spread the story faster. The tale of a resurrected child would travel plantation to plantation, whispered in cabins, carried in fields, magnified into legend. And legends gave enslaved people hope. Hope was a far greater threat than any weapon. "No," Margaret said firmly. "Sis stays. Here, the story can be controlled. Managed. She is confused, traumatized, and we make sure everyone believes it. 3 people nodded, agreeing out loud while their hearts silently confessed the truth. Nothing about Sara was confused. At 7, Esther brought Sara to the main house. The girl was washed, dressed, scrubbed clean of the soil she'd slept under for 3 days. In the morning light, she looked deceptively ordinary, thin, small, fragile. But the moment she stepped into the study, the room shifted. The air thickened, the sunlight dimmed, as if shrinking back from her. All 3 adults felt it, the presence of something that did not belong in the world of the living. Margaret attempted gentleness, her smile brittle. "You frightened us, child. Dr. Merritt believes you experienced a rare condition, a deep sleep that mimics death. You were never truly gone. You only imagined it. That's why you think you died. Trauma creates stories to make sense of fear." She leaned forward, voice silky, rehearsed, a lie dressed in compassion. "You weren't dead, Sara. You were sick and confused. What you said last night wasn't real." But Sara's eyes, ancient and steady in her small face, told a different story when Margaret felt sinking into her bones. "Tiger wasan, ti confused." She remembered everything, and she wasn't finished. "Dr. Merritt made an error, which he deeply regrets. We buried you by mistake. You woke up, managed to dig yourself out somehow, and now you're recovering. That's the truth. That's what actually happened. Do you understand?" Sara looked at Margaret without blinking, steady and unwavering. Her voice was quiet, but carried perfect clarity. "You're lying. To me, to yourself, to everyone. You know I was dead. You're just afraid to admit it because it breaks your understanding of how the world works. Because it suggests there are forces bigger than you, powers you don't control, consequences you can't calculate away." Margaret's jaw tightened. "That's enough. I'm trying to be patient, trying to understand that you're confused and traumatized, but you will not speak to me that way. You're a child, and you raid my property. You will show proper respect." Even as she said it, the words felt hollow, powerless. How do you threaten someone who has already died? How do you control someone who has nothing left to fear? Sara tilted her head, studying Margaret like a ledger entry gone wrong. "I don't hate you, Mrs. Sutton. I probably should, but I don't. I understand you. You're a product of your time, of this system. You were taught people like me are property, that our lives have monetary value and nothing more. You're doing what you think is right, but you're wrong. And what happened to me proves it. I died because you calculated saving me would cost more than I was worth, $5 versus $250. Bad investment. Not worth it. Let me die." Her voice remained calm, almost conversational, which only made the words cut deeper. "You put a price on my life. You do it every day with everyone here. You calculate our value like livestock or equipment. But human lives have no prices. They're infinite, priceless. And when you treat them as commodities, when you let people die over money, there are consequences." Margaret stood abruptly, chair scraping. "I will not be lectured by a child. I will not feel guilty for making practical business decisions. This plantation runs on mathematics and economics, not sentiment. Resources are limited. Choices have to be made." "You're right," Sara said, maddeningly calm. "Resources are limited. Choices have to be made, but the choices you make define who you are. They define your soul, and you chose to let a 9-year-old girl die rather than spend $5 on medicine. That choice says everything about who you are. It will follow you for the rest of your life." She turned toward the door, then paused. "You asked what I want, why I came back. I came back to make you see, to make you understand what you've done, what you do every day. I came back to remind you that you can just erase people who aren't profitable enough. I came back to haunt your conscience till you change, or it destroys you." Sara left the study. Margaret trembled, caught between rage, fear, and something she refused to name. Briggs was pale, sweating, his hands on his pistols, desperate to act yet too afraid after last night's failure. Dr. Merritt stared at his hands, at the instruments of his profession, Now useless against the reality he had witnessed, the three sat in silence. Briggs finally whispered, rough and desperate, "We should kill her tonight, make it look like an accident. A fall, a snake bite. Something natural. She's too dangerous alive. She'd destroy everything." Margaret considered it. The thought alone revealed how far they'd fallen, how desperate they'd become. But she shook her head. Dead. She becomes a legend. Alive, she's just a confused child we can discredit over time. She didn't speak aloud the darker truth that bullets might not hit her, that perhaps she could not be killed by ordinary means. Better to pretend all is normal and hope the world forgets. That routine reasserts itself. But Blackwood Plantation would never be normal again. Strange things began immediately. At first small. The dogs refused to approach Sara, barking from a distance, cowering if forced near her. Horsey shied and bolted when she passed. Chickens stopped laying eggs near her cabin, pacing nervously, distressed. Even plants seemed to sense her. The cotton where she had collapsed withered, leaves curling and falling, a 20-foot square patch dead while everything else thrived. Workers avoided the area, claiming the ground itself rejected them, claiming they felt watched. An illness began to follow. Dr. Merritt, lying in bed just a day after Sarah's return, developed a cough. By the next day, fever. By the third, he struggled to breathe. Pneumonia, the same disease that had claimed. Sara now crept through the one man who had once held certainty over life and death. He lay there in horror, listening to the wheezing in his chest, realizing with growing dread that the girl who had returned from death had not just survived, she had brought the weight of justice with her, and Blackwood Plantation would never recover from it.